Some books do not feel complicated when you read them. In fact, they can seem almost too simple at first. Just a few ideas. A few principles. A few lines that sound easy to understand. But then you sit with them, and slowly you realize something uncomfortable. The ideas are simple, but living them is not. Because sometimes the hardest truths are not hidden in complexity. They are hidden in ordinary daily habits we never question. We all want peace. We want clarity. We want healthy relationships. We want less stress, less misunderstanding, less emotional pain. But most people spend their lives trapped in invisible patterns. Patterns of overthinking, taking things personally, making assumptions, speaking carelessly, and living under silent agreements they never consciously chose. These patterns become so normal that they start to feel like personality. But what if they are not your true self? What if they are only learned habits? And what if a better way of living begins by breaking those habits one by one? Today's story is about freedom. Not freedom in the political sense. Not freedom through money, status, or success. This is inner freedom. Freedom from mental chaos. Freedom from emotional self-sabotage. Freedom from the invisible rules that create suffering in everyday life. Hey everyone, welcome back to Inspired Pages. On this channel, we explore books that help us understand life, the mind, human behavior, and the deeper principles that shape the way we live. In our previous videos, we have explored books about power, awareness, healing, and transformation. Today, we are turning to a book that is short in length, but powerful in impact. A book that many people read quickly, but spend years trying to truly practice. Today's book is The 4 Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz. This book is built around 4 simple principles. 4 agreements you make with yourself. 4 ways of living that can reduce suffering and create more peace, honesty, and freedom. Ruiz presents them not as motivational slogans, but as practical tools for transforming the way we think, speak, and relate to others. At the center of the book is one powerful idea: much of human suffering comes not from reality itself, but from the agreements we have accepted about ourselves and the world. These agreements are beliefs, rules, assumptions, interpretations. We inherit them from family, culture, society, religion, school, and experience. Over time, we stop noticing them. We simply live by them. Some of these agreements help us function, but many of them create pain. For example, a child may grow up absorbing the message that they are not enough unless they succeed. Another person may learn that love must be earned through sacrifice. Someone else may internalize the belief that mistakes make them unworthy. Others may learn to hide emotions, fear judgment, over-explain themselves, or seek constant approval. These agreements become the inner voice. The one that criticizes, compares, worries, and reacts. Don Miguel Ruiz says that if we want freedom, we must become aware of these invisible rules and replace them with better ones. That is where the 4 agreements begin. The first agreement is this: be impeccable with your word. At first, this sounds simple. Speak well. Tell the truth. Use language carefully. But Ruiz means something deeper. He says the word is one of the most powerful tools we have. Words can create trust, love, confidence, and healing. But they can also create fear, shame, division, and destruction. Think about how many wounds begin with words. A careless insult. A humiliating comment. Constant criticism. A lie. Gossip. A harsh sentence repeated over time. Words do not disappear after they are spoken. They often remain in memory for years. Sometimes a single sentence can shape the way a person sees themselves for a long time. This is why being impeccable with your word matters so much. It means speaking with integrity, saying what you mean, avoiding using language to harm others or yourself, refusing gossip, manipulation, and verbal cruelty. It also means being careful about the words you use in your own mind. That last part is especially important. Many people think they are only using words when they speak out loud. But in reality, the most powerful words may be the ones they say silently to themselves every day. I am useless. I always fail. No one cares. I ruin everything. I am behind. I am not enough. These internal sentences shape emotion, confidence, and action. They are private, but they are not harmless. Ruiz reminds us that the word carries creative power. It shapes reality through meaning. If you use your word against yourself, you slowly build an inner world filled with fear and limitation. If you use your word with truth and compassion, you begin to build something healthier. Being impeccable with your word does not mean being perfect. It means being intentional. It means recognizing that language matters. Your speech matters. The tone you use with others matters. The way you describe yourself matters. And the stories you repeat become the world you emotionally live in. The second agreement is one of the most famous and perhaps one of the hardest to practice. Don't take anything personally. This sounds liberating when you first hear it. But in daily life, it can feel nearly impossible. People judge, criticize, ignore, misunderstand, reject, and project. Naturally, it hurts. So what does Ruiz really mean? He means that what other people say and do is often more about them than about you. Their reactions come from their beliefs, fears, wounds, assumptions, expectations, and emotional state. If someone is angry, insecure, controlling, arrogant, or dismissive, their behavior reflects the world inside them. It may affect you, yes. It may even harm you. But it does not define your worth. This agreement is powerful because so much suffering comes from personalization. Someone gives a short reply, and you assume they dislike you. Someone criticizes you, and you feel your identity is under attack. Someone rejects your effort, and you interpret it as proof that you are not good enough. One moment becomes a personal story. And those stories become heavy. Ruiz encourages us to break that habit. He says that when you stop taking things personally, you become less vulnerable to the emotional chaos of others. You still listen. You still learn. You still care. But you stop turning every reaction into a wound to your identity. This is not indifference. It is emotional freedom. It means understanding that praise and criticism can both be distorted. If someone admires you, that may reflect their perspective, not your entire truth. If someone attacks you, that also reflects their perspective, not your entire truth. Once you understand this, you stop living at the mercy of everyone's opinion. This agreement can transform relationships. It reduces defensiveness. It reduces overthinking. It reduces the exhausting habit of constantly trying to manage how everyone sees you. It reminds you that your worth cannot be built on unstable external reactions. At the same time, this agreement asks for maturity. Because there will always be moments when criticism contains truth. Not taking things personally does not mean refusing feedback. It means receiving feedback without collapsing into shame. It means separating information from identity. Someone can dislike your action without that meaning you are worthless. Someone can misunderstand you without that meaning you are broken. That distinction changes everything. The third agreement is this: don't make assumptions. This might be the most quietly destructive habit of all. People assume constantly. They assume what others mean. They assume what others feel. They assume what silence means. They assume what a message means. They assume rejection, disrespect, betrayal, superiority, disinterest, and judgment with almost no evidence. Assumptions are mental shortcuts, but they are expensive. They create misunderstanding, conflict, resentment, and anxiety. Think about how often people suffer because of stories they created in their own mind. Someone does not reply quickly, and the assumption begins. They are ignoring me. They are upset with me. They do not value me. Another person sees a facial expression and assumes disrespect. A partner forgets something and the assumption becomes, you do not care. A colleague acts distant and the mind fills in the rest. Very often, the assumption is wrong. But by the time truth appears, the emotional damage has already happened. Ruiz teaches that assumptions are dangerous because they make us believe we know what we do not actually know. Instead of asking, clarifying, or waiting, we create stories. And then we react to those stories as if they were facts. This is one of the main sources of drama in relationships. Not reality itself, but interpretation. The antidote is communication. Ask questions. Seek clarity. Say what you mean. Do not expect others to read your mind, and do not pretend you can read theirs. Simple, honest communication prevents a huge amount of suffering. This agreement is deeply practical in modern life, especially now that so much communication happens through texts, short messages, and indirect signals. A delayed reply can trigger insecurity. A brief message can trigger confusion. Social media can trigger endless comparison and misinterpretation. Ruiz's advice becomes even more relevant here. Do not create emotional storms from incomplete information. There is another layer to this agreement too. We do not only make assumptions about others. We make assumptions about ourselves. We assume we cannot change. We assume we are too late. We assume we are not capable. We assume failure before trying. These assumptions quietly shape our lives. Breaking assumptions creates space for truth. And truth creates peace. The fourth agreement is this: always do your best. This may sound like common advice, almost too familiar to feel powerful. But in this book, it carries a specific meaning. Ruiz does not say, be perfect. He does not say, outperform everyone. He does not say, never rest. He says, do your best, and understand that your best will change from moment to moment. Your best when you are healthy is different from your best when you are exhausted. Your best when you are calm is different from your best when you are grieving. Your best today may not look like your best yesterday. This agreement is important because so many people suffer from perfectionism, guilt, and self-judgment. They measure themselves against impossible standards. They delay action because they fear imperfection. They punish themselves for being human. Ruiz offers a more grounded path. Show up honestly. Give what you can. Be sincere in effort. Let that be enough. When you do your best, you reduce regret. You reduce self-blame. You stop feeding the inner critic that says you should have been flawless. This agreement turns effort into peace, not punishment. And there is wisdom in the phrase, always do your best, because it connects the other three agreements to daily life. You will not always speak perfectly. You will sometimes take things personally. You will still make assumptions. But if you are doing your best with awareness, you keep learning without turning mistakes into identity. That is a much healthier way to grow. Together, these 4 agreements form a kind of mental and emotional code. They are simple enough to remember, but deep enough to practice for years. Be impeccable with your word. Don't take anything personally. Don't make assumptions. Always do your best. Each one protects you from a different kind of suffering. The first protects against the damage caused by language. The second protects against emotional dependence on others' opinions. The third protects against false stories and confusion. The fourth protects against self-abuse disguised as self-improvement. But the book goes deeper than the agreements themselves. Ruiz also talks about the process by which society trains people into fear. He describes how human beings are domesticated from childhood. We are taught what is acceptable, what is shameful, what is rewarded, and what is punished. Through repetition, approval, and fear of rejection, we internalize a system of beliefs. This system becomes a kind of inner judge. The inner judge monitors behavior, criticizes mistakes, compares us to ideals, and creates guilt when we fail to match the image we were taught to chase. Beside the judge lives the inner victim, the part of us that feels punished, ashamed, and inadequate. This is one of the most psychologically powerful parts of the book. Because once you see the inner judge clearly, you start noticing how often your suffering comes from self-condemnation, not just from events. You make a mistake, and the judge attacks. You say the wrong thing, and the judge attacks. You fall short, hesitate, fail, or feel weak, and again the judge attacks. The 4 agreements weaken that inner system. They interrupt automatic suffering. They replace fear-based patterns with conscious ones. For example, if you are impeccable with your word, you stop using language as a weapon against yourself. If you do not take things personally, you reduce the judge's tendency to turn other people's moods into your shame. If you do not make assumptions, you reduce imaginary suffering. If you always do your best, you remove the judge's demand for perfection. That is why this book feels so freeing. It is not just about morality. It is about reducing unnecessary pain. And a lot of pain truly is unnecessary. Not all pain, of course. Life will still bring loss, change, disappointment, and uncertainty. The book does not promise a pain-free life. But it shows that much of what exhausts us daily is self-created through mental habits. A careless interpretation. A private insult toward ourselves. A false story. A reaction to someone else's projection. A pressure to be unrealistically flawless. Once you see this, your life starts to simplify. Not because everything becomes easy, but because you stop adding extra suffering to what is already hard. One of the reasons the 4 agreements has remained popular is that its teachings are so practical. You can use them in family life, work, friendships, marriage, leadership, conflict, parenting, and self-development. They do not require a special environment. They require awareness. Imagine how much calmer relationships would become if people asked for clarity instead of making assumptions. Imagine how much less anxiety people would carry if they stopped taking every opinion personally. Imagine how much less shame people would feel if they practiced doing their best instead of demanding perfection. Imagine how different the inner world would feel if the voice inside became more truthful and less cruel. That is the transformation this book points toward. It also challenges a very common modern habit: emotional overreaction to every stimulus. A message, a comment, a look, a delay, a disagreement, a misunderstanding, everything can feel like a threat when the mind is undisciplined. Ruiz's agreements restore a kind of inner steadiness. They help you pause before reacting. They help you stop turning uncertainty into drama. They help you live with more dignity and less emotional noise. Another reason this book matters is that it gives responsibility back to the individual without becoming harsh. It does not say the world is always fair. It does not deny that people can be difficult, selfish, cruel, or careless. But it reminds you that your peace cannot depend entirely on everyone else behaving well. At some point, freedom requires inner discipline. That is a strong message. Because many people wait for the world to become easier before they allow themselves peace. This book suggests something different. Peace begins when your own agreements change. And maybe that is why the book feels both gentle and demanding at the same time. The principles are compassionate, but they ask you to take responsibility for your reactions, your words, your assumptions, and your effort. They do not let you stay unconscious. That is where the real transformation happens. Toward the end, the deeper lesson becomes clear: freedom is not found by controlling everything outside you. It is found by changing the internal rules that shape how you experience life. If your inner agreements are based on fear, shame, assumption, and self-attack, life becomes heavy. If your inner agreements are based on truth, clarity, effort, and emotional detachment, life becomes lighter. Not perfect, but lighter, cleaner, more peaceful, more honest. The Four Agreements teaches that suffering often grows in the gap between reality and interpretation. It grows in careless words, imagined meanings, wounded ego, and impossible expectations. Reduce those, and you reduce a huge amount of daily pain. In the end, this book is not only about wisdom. It is about practice. You cannot read these principles once and expect instant transformation. You return to them again and again. In conflict. In silence. In stress. In relationships. In private moments with yourself. That is where they become real. Because being careful with your word is a daily practice. Not taking things personally is a daily practice. Not making assumptions is a daily practice. Doing your best is a daily practice. And little by little, those practices change your life. If this message resonated with you, if it made you reflect on the invisible habits creating stress in your own life, then subscribe to Inspired Pages. On this channel, we explore books that help us think clearly, live wisely, and grow from the inside out. Share this video with someone who overthinks too much, someone navigating conflict, or someone trying to find more peace in everyday life. Because sometimes transformation does not require 100 complicated lessons. Sometimes it begins with just 4 simple agreements lived honestly. This is Inspired Pages. Stay clear, stay grounded, and keep growing.